let's talk a little bit about the standard question that you'll see when you start many of the projects that somehow involve data integration, or actually anything else as well, whether you want to build something in-house or improve something that you already have in-house, or buy an existing tool that does what you are looking for. What is interesting is that this is something that often starts, just on some sort of a meeting somewhere in the boardroom or a meeting room where people start discussing the project, and it often goes like, oh yeah, we are starting something today or tomorrow, we are kicking off a new project, and then people start to kind of think about what they need to do, whether they want to buy something or they want to build it in-house. And both camps have quite a lot of good arguments for everything, whether, for example, the development is expensive or too risky, can take forever, or the tools can lock you into a vendor, or again, they can be expensive, they might not work as you imagined, and so on. So during this presentation, I want to talk a little bit about the questions that you often get asked during this kind of evaluation, and help you decide whether you are more on the buying or building side, whether you want to, or whether it makes sense for you to build something or maybe buy it. First, let's talk a little bit about what kind of solutions we'll be talking about. Since CloverDX is a data integration company or data management company, I will be focusing on that. So even the examples that I'll mention during the presentation will focus on data integration and in general data movement and work with data. I'm not going to be talking about what you do when you want to buy a CRM or something that's really kind of like a purpose-built one use kind of an application. So when you are working with data integration or building a data integration solution, oftentimes you'll start with something that somehow organically grown in-house over the years. Many times this is something that grown out of kind of a shadow IT style of working, where people just improve their processes by automating them little by little. This is the world of Excel macros or small applications or small scripts that people write. And over time, they often get connected into something bigger. Maybe someone writes a monitoring script or even ties it with some sort of a monitoring tool to hold it together. And you all can imagine that this is something that will not scale well and it will not work for a long time. So oftentimes after a while, you are faced with a problem of what to do when you want to improve this. And this is especially something that is very risky, given that in many cases these solutions are held together simply by few people who understand how they work. And if they leave, or if a critical person leaves the company, you no longer have anyone who really understands what certain parts of it do, and then everyone is afraid to modify it because it might pose quite a lot of risk to the business. Second type of in-house built applications or data integration solutions is more kind of purpose-built solutions, where you actually start coding in whatever language you are familiar with, whether you Python, Java, or anything else, and you actually build on top of that. This is often designed to solve whatever problem you have when you start. Frequently, you are logged into certain version of something of the platform that you start with, and you usually do not update. If it works, why doing anything with it? Oftentimes, you kind of end up with something that still works well, but it needs to be extended beyond the original design, which requires massive rewrites, or it might not even be possible in the technology that you've picked, or maybe it runs on something that's no longer supported. Right? It might require some libraries or something that no longer work with what you need to use, for example, for security reasons. Right? You do not want to stay too much behind, because then you are at risk of someone stealing your data or breaking into your network. And something like this often requires developers to maintain it. So while you still might have in-house knowledge of how it works and what is there, it's typically expensive to maintain it, because you are using essentially the most expensive resources that you have, the developers, who should frankly be working on something else rather than maintaining a platform that just knows how to send files from one place to another. Then this is contrasted, of course, if you start with something and you buy data management or data integration platform. This is an interesting kind of a project when you do this, because compared to something like, for example, CRM or something similar, you are not going to be able to avoid some sort of coding anyway. And some people call it customization, where you build your data flows, but to some people it's just a different way of coding something. You might be using graphical tools like, drag and drop interfaces, connecting arrows to boxes and so on, but it's still development work. So you will still be using the expensive resources, the developers, or your data scientists, or whoever takes care of that thing in your organization, but they will need to care for smaller amount of work. They no longer need to maintain the platform as such, right? Because someone wrote that and you bought it. They will just maintain the business logic. And the best thing is that you usually would want to reuse the platform in other use cases. So you might start with something smaller, for example, specific to one department, and then move or expand to other departments so that you can share or split costs between multiple departments. So in turn, this might be getting cheaper. And so these are the three options that will be considering whether buying something or extending something you have, or whether it's something organically grown or designed with the purpose of doing your data integration. And when you consider a data project, it has usually 4 high-level phases. In the first phase, that's the project preparation, where you just are trying to figure out what you need, and usually you collect business requirements and turn them into specification for the technical team who will be implementing that. Then you, of course, need to design and develop and test everything after you deploy to production and run it in production for a while. And that is, of course, connected with support and maintenance. So you are moving from just getting something all the way to having it in production and maintaining it for longer periods of time so that it can support your business. Let's now have a look at each of these phases and talk a little bit about what you can encounter, what questions are there, and how you can evaluate whether building or buying is better for you in general. So let's look at what you are faced with during project preparation. So the first thing that you always will need to do is figure out what you want to do, like scope, and then produce specifications for the teams or team implementing that. In both cases, whether you are building or buying, you will need business requirements for what you want. This is not going to change, but of course, in different cases, you will need slightly different way of presenting the business requirements. You will need different people to translate them for the implementation team. When you are building the solution in-house, you will need someone who can translate it to developers who work in, let's say, Python, Java, or something like that. But on the other hand, when you buy a solution, you will need someone who understands the platform that you bought and translates the business requirements in terms of that platform. What is interesting is that when you build something in-house, you will, besides just the business problem solution, you will have to specify what I would call non-business stuff. So that is something like how to monitor the platform, how to update it, and all kinds of other processes that you will need to think about and actually even implement in the solution that you have. While when you are selecting the platform, these turn into the requirements for the platform. And for example, you need certain connectivity or reporting needs, or the ability to transform something, the way that it's updated or how often, and so on. So that is now a requirement for the platform that you will be selecting. So instead of coding that, you will just have to evaluate with those requirements in mind. Oftentimes during the preparation of the project, you will need to figure out some sort of a timeline. You might have a deadline from a business, for example, so you might need to figure out how much you can do and what is absolutely necessary to get your project towards successful finish, and what is like the minimal amount of work you need to do there. What's interesting is the perception that oftentimes when you want to build something in-house, people will say that you can start doing that immediately. Our experience when talking with customers is that it is actually not really true. The only case when this is true is that if you have developers sitting idle, and that is very rare occurrence, because who wants to have your most expensive resources not doing anything. They always are doing something, whether it's just improving what you have or whatever. They will not be doing nothing. So you always have to time it out with finishing some sort of a project that the developers are doing. On the other hand, with buying the solutions, you will have the procurement processes or approval processes, or getting the finance to approve everything. Depending on the organization, this can take months, even for relatively small amounts of money that you will pay for the platform. Often this is challenging because sometimes you can even face, for example, legal challenges, especially if you are working in a tightly regulated industry like banking, finance, insurance, and a few others. You might need to look for a platform that satisfies those as well, that are not really, something that you would want to do all the time. One thing that can be helpful when you are building your solution is always look around for existing solutions, even if you don't end up buying that. The reason for that is quite simple. You often will figure out interesting things that you might want to avoid or that you might want to add to your solution because someone already spent the time and invested some effort into doing that before. Right? So if you do not find a product that matches what you need, it can still help you design the solution and leading by example, basically showing your developers what you are trying to accomplish can help you get them up to speed and what you need faster than just starting from zero and not giving them anything. And of course, when you are buying something, you can use professional services. Almost every vendor that will provide the integration solution will have some sort of consultants or something like that. Often they will have partners that can help you. And this is very useful to kickstart the project. So the timeline from actually deciding to do something to really having something, at least a little bit working, can be significantly shorter than when you start building in-house, unless you really have something lying around that matches your requirement. In general, what we've seen as we talk with our customers is all kinds of ways they try to make the process of buying something more effective. And just a few points that should help you when you are trying to pick something and buy a platform. The first thing is kind of obvious, but it's interesting how many people kind of forget to write it down, is pick whatever platform matches your requirements as closely as possible. And this is something that you can very easily help with writing down what you need. You can send that to multiple vendors. They will respond to that. It's much faster than trying to remember what you need on every call with every vendor. The same thing when you basically talk to the vendor about what you are trying to do, let them help you and talk about the stuff that's around that. For example, what other systems you have, what you need to connect with. They will be able to advise you on different approaches. Maybe there is something more effective than what you came up with. Also, when you are trying new software, really try it. And so use the trial if whatever you are looking at offers that, and set up the trial in a way that you have a certain goal to accomplish. For example, implement one of the data pipelines or connect to some system that's notoriously hard to work with or something like that, so that you have something so that you can compare different vendors against each other. Otherwise, it's just kind of trying to figure out and basically working on feelings, whether you like the product or not. You can also work with the vendor more effectively and basically ask them to perform a POC for you. Most vendors will help you here because they will want to prove that whatever platform they provide works in your use case. And just be careful about the scope of the POC. Don't try to implement half of your solution as a POC, because that usually doesn't lead to good results. Pick something that's limited, as small as possible, that gives you confidence that the platform that you are picking implements what you need. And as in the case of the requirements, just have the specification written before you actually start that, because otherwise you again get into endless discussions about what is in scope, what is not, what is needed, what is not needed. And as you are doing this, as you are doing the evaluations or maybe even the POC, if the vendor doesn't offer that to you, set up frequent calls with them so that you can keep track of the process. Because otherwise, again, you can get out of sync very easily, especially if you are working on a POC, they can implement something that you might not need. Let's have a look at the second phase. So let's say that you have selected whether you buy or build, and you now want to design and develop your solution. The first thing that you will have to look at is getting your development environment and development processes ready. If you already have development team, you have all of that, right? They have the platform, they know how to build whatever you need, they have the tools. If you don't have the development team, I'd say do not try to build one. Just buy the solution that's as close to what you need as possible, because creating a development team from scratch is not easy. It's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time for developers to work together effectively, especially if you want something like agile or similar processes where basically want to deliver things quickly and often. For the buying side, you need to look at the processes that you already have, and oftentimes you will already have development team or data engineers or someone who is technical and will need to work with the tool and try to find something that matches the processes or that can support the processes that you have so that you do not have to invent new ones. If you don't have the processes or you don't feel they are sufficient, work with the vendor. They will help you create things to work well within your environment, because as I mentioned before, they will want you to use their product and to be successful with it, right? So they will help you get things going. One very interesting question as you are doing something is the cost of building that or cost of the development. In both cases, since we are talking about data integration, you will have to develop or code something. If you are building some solution on your own without using the platform to do that, you will have quite a hard time usually figuring out how much it will cost and doing the estimates. Even if you have skilled team, oftentimes they underestimate something. And there is a research, I think the numbers I have here are about Gartner or someone similar, where significant fraction of projects ends up with 200% cost and more than 70% schedule slips, right? So almost everything gets longer and more expensive as it's built. You will have the same challenge when you build a platform, but in this case, the scope of what you have to estimate will be smaller. You are no longer going to be estimating how long it will take to develop a reporting solution or logging or monitoring or stuff like that. You will only be estimating the cost of the solution of your business problem, right? So basically how long it will take to implement business logic. And since presumably if you bought a tool, it's a new thing for you, you don't have people skilled with it, you should work with the vendor to help you estimate the cost and provide some numbers so that you can work with that. In both cases, you will need expensive resources or developers, data engineers, or similar technical people. And what's interesting is that oftentimes when people develop in-house, they somehow get the impression that using developers is kind of free because they do not see an invoice typically, right? Sometimes it's a different part of the organization, so they do see the invoice, but most of the time they don't. But the developers are not free, even if they are already your employees. It's very expensive to use them for things that they don't have to do. So think very well before building low-level code, low-level platforms that you can simply buy. It might be, it might look expensive to buy something worth $100,000 compared to spending 6 months of work of someone, but 6 months of a developer can easily cost you $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. So you are not that far off, and you will need to keep developing your in-house stuff longer while the platform is just there and works for you. Another often neglected and kind of forgotten part of the whole development of anything is the testing and QA. Oftentimes when people talk about testing and QA, they talk about QA of the business process itself or of the business logic. So, whether, for example, the fees are calculated properly, you are doing something with financial data or something like that. But you also need, when you are doing in-house development, you also need to test the platform. You need to make sure that it works properly, that it doesn't crash when it's loaded, that the reporting, logging, and everything that the support needs works as well. When you do this with a platform that you buy, this is again something that you need to test, but you should not need to test into such low level, right? If you buy some, good product, it's going to have good support for everything you need. You just need to make sure that it works in the context as you need to. So you are effectively testing the configuration rather than testing the implementation. In both cases, you would want to automate everything as much as possible, and you will end up using pretty much the same tools for automation. Things like Jenkins to automate your builds and deployments, all kinds of monitoring tools to process your logs, to feed them into whatever platforms you have to track those and so on. In cases where you buy the platform, the vendor of the platform will be able to simply help you with that. They will help you set it up and make sure that you set up the connectivity to your log collection and other utilities in the most effective way as you need to. And since we are talking about testing, the scope of the testing is again something that you need to know up front, and it's very hard to estimate. The only thing you know is that when you are testing the in-house solution, you will need to test everything because you are building everything by yourself. While when you buy something, you should not really need to test low-level components of the thing. So, for example, if they say that they connect with a database, then you should just buy from a vendor that you trust. So you are not going to test whether it really can connect to the database. You simply use it, and if it does, then it works fine, and you do not need to perform some sort of integration tests. When you get to basically the end of your development process, again, we have few things we've learned over the years on our projects about deployment of the data platforms. One of the things that works very well is simply work with your vendor, either during the development or during the training, to make sure that every user that will touch the platform that you buy is trained properly. Many vendors will offer different levels of training. You can have user training just for people who are looking at the platform and consuming data from it. You can have separate training for developers. That's a lot more technical, but and usually takes longer, but not many people need to attend that usually. And the same thing is when you want to deploy something, work with your vendor to make sure that you deploy it in a way that provides you with the maximum security, stability, and scalability of the solution. Oftentimes, the vendor will be able to suggest something that can improve the way that you deploy, so that, for example, you get your updates faster, or it's more stable, or stuff like that. As I mentioned before, when you do this properly, the vendor will want to work with you, because for most of them, selling software is not just one-time thing where you just give them money for the licenses or for whatever, but rather they want to work with you and grow with you so that you can buy more products later or keep subscribing for a longer time. So they will try to help you as much as possible to basically make you like the platform and use it for a longer time. When we get to production, this is where all kinds of interesting stuff starts to happen, because you will see the need for monitoring of everything. And so you need to make sure that as it is deployed and it's running somewhere, you know what it's doing. When you do this with in-house products, often this is something that is not really planned from the beginning and is just added at the end when people realize that, oh yeah, we really need to send reports about what this is doing. While with the platforms that you buy frequently, this is part of the solution, and you can relatively easily set up alerts, notifications, connect with all kinds of third-party tools that help you monitor your stuff and so on. Oftentimes, the tools will allow you to simply connect with things that you might already have in-house. Tools like New Relic, Datadog, and others that basically collect logs and events and allow you to see see them in one place so that you can investigate issues if there are any. In any case, if you are building monitoring, do not try to roll your own platform for that. It's a lot of work, and there are even free tools that can do that very effectively and at large scale. Another thing that you will have to think about and basically plan from the very beginning is the scalability of your solution. It's very rare that when you deploy something in production, it stays the same forever. And usually the data volumes grow, or new use cases are deployed, new functionality is needed. So you kind of keep adding more and more stuff, and you need to make sure that the solution that you have can grow as you add more things to it. When you do that with in-house development, you have to basically account for that from the very beginning. Proper scalability is something that's pretty hard to implement, especially if you are really getting into things like clustering or parallel processing and stuff like that. It's hard to test because there can be all kinds of weird bugs. Even if you use libraries that can help you there, it's still a lot of work to get it right. So when you are picking the platform, just make sure that you pick something that can handle even your optimistic estimates of how much data you will want to process several years into the future, because otherwise you are just setting up yourselves for having to pick a replacement a couple of years down the line. And oftentimes with modern tools, what you need is just pay a little bit more for example, for some extra licenses, or maybe if you are using SaaS tools, just pay more for usage and so on. Another important thing, especially these days, is security. This is an interesting question because, of course, every organization has a different standard for security. Some organizations don't really need that much, while others need to watch everything that happens on their network. So this is something where everyone will have different opinions and different experiences. And you might have excellent security and development teams, so they will implement things properly and make sure that when you create in-house solutions, they work within the latest security standards and so on. But oftentimes this is not really the case, and you will just reuse the accounts that they are kind of there. So if you are building an application that uses databases, it uses database accounts or something from operating system and so on. This is the easiest way of doing that. So that's what often ends up happening. On the other hand, what you really want is something that integrates a bit better with kind of larger solutions. So you might want single sign-on or some sort of corporate directory integration, like Active Directory or something similar. So always when picking the platform, consider this and pick the one that matches the requirements that you have, so that you don't end up having to create some sort of workaround to get your users configured properly. And again, a few tips from our experience when you want to run production effectively. One thing that, again, is kind of expensive, but it pays off very well, is to monitor everything you can. Like, track the number of records that flow into the system, out of it, how many jobs fail, how often they fail, track how long they take, and so on. And one very interesting thing is to provide the high-level summaries of these to business users. So you don't need to tell them that you have 300 jobs that ran in, I don't know, 3 seconds each or something like that. Just give them the total runtime or some sort of speed or something. Oftentimes they know what kind of data is supposed to be flowing through the system, and they will learn how to guess whether the numbers are correct or not. And if something happens, they will be able to report that even if nothing is wrong on the technical level. They will see irregularities in the data, and you can react to that. One thing that will always help your business is if your technical team keeps looking for inefficiencies and suggest improvements. Most business users love that. There can be, of course, exceptions, but in many cases, they will like when the technical people provide improvements that, for example, get their reports faster or more precise or something like that, and especially if it doesn't cost too much. And one very important point, just have backups of everything and just make sure that they work. We've seen several times before companies that did not have backups, or even if they did not test them properly, and when the time came to restore something, they realized that they can't, and they either had to restore some old version and then manually fix all kinds of things, or weren't able to restore anything. If you are buying a platform, just make sure that you work with the vendor to help you set the backup in a way that works within your organization to your standards, and is effective to storing whatever the platform needs. Then the last thing is the support and maintenance. This is something that starts as soon as you deploy something into production. You need to start supporting that. When you build solutions in-house, there's basically no one to help you there. And the support is homegrown, basically. And usually it falls to the original development team. This is something that developers hate. At least every developer I've seen so far hates doing support. They are fine providing technical support to the actual support team, right? So if someone comes to them and asks, why do I get exception over here? They go and investigate, that's fine. But they usually don't really want to talk with the client or with business or anyone like that. So support roles in the development team are typically not received very well by the developers. On the other hand, if you buy, you should look for vendors that can provide support at the level that you need. Oftentimes you can find vendors that provide 24/7, which when you want to do it in-house, if you don't already, it can be very expensive. So, the vendors usually can't do this simply because of the scale. They might have many customers, so the cost is spread quite wide. You will still need in-house support, but usually it's what I would call first level support. So people who can, for example, configure accounts, change settings, advise users if they get stuck or something, and so on. And these are resources that are much easier to find than the developers, and they are much cheaper as a result. Right? You don't need to pay someone $100,000 a year to, be able to create an account in Active Directory. One thing that often is forgotten during planning is the updates. And there are a few kinds of updates. The first that I'll talk about are the updates of the platform itself. When you are doing things in-house, this is unlikely to happen most of the time, simply because you will just be reacting, right? If there is an issue reported, you will update the backend and anything. Oftentimes this is done because of security, or maybe there's a new requirement because you need to support some new business requirement, but that's it. You are not going to develop new features just because you want or you think it's cool. Unless it has a real use that will help business, it's not going to happen. While if you buy something, the vendor will keep the product updated, and if they want to stay on the market, they will need to release new versions. So you are essentially getting new functionality for kind of free, although it's not free, and you will be paying support, maintenance, or subscription or something, but still you do not have to think about those new features. Oftentimes you can also suggest things to the vendor and they will implement it for you in the end. You can also get help of using those new functions and help and kind of make effective use of those. And connected with that is that you should keep updating whatever platform you have and do it regularly. Do not get into the habit of leaving it untouched for 5 years and then wondering why it's very hard to upgrade. Just keep maybe one version behind or something, just so that you are not too far back, so that you minimize the risk of updates. The second kind of updates are new requirements from the business and bug fixes. In both cases, you will need to develop something, right? Because since we are talking about data integration, the processes that you have there are your own. While in the in-house build, you will need full development process because any change might actually impact the platform itself as well. So you might need to develop some low-level components to help you there. While with the platform, if you buy something, you usually just need to update the business logic, right? So add new transformation, modify the data layout in something, and so on. So the scope of changes is usually limited compared to what you need to consider when you build solution in-house. And again, kind of summarizing that, one thing that will help you with support and maintenance is work with the vendor, and not only on raising support tickets and requesting response and so on, but rather talk with them about things you need, things you are doing, or the bugs that you have. Watch for the bugs they fix so that you know whether it makes sense to, for example, jump to new version and so on. This obviously is slightly different if you are using SaaS products, because then you have no choice. You get upgraded whether you want or not. But for non-SaaS, for let's say on-premise stuff, just keep your stuff updated so that you do not lag too much behind the releases, because incremental updates are a lot less risky than large updates every few years. Now, since I mentioned that we provide data integration solutions, let's talk a little bit about that and tie that together with what I've talked so far about the buy option. So what we provide is called Clover DX Data Management Platform. And this is a platform that helps you increase your productivity, helps you solve complex problems, and automate your solutions to great extent, basically, so that you do not have to have people watching that, but things happen on their own. We have 4 core principles or 4 core verbs that we try to think about when we go to a project and when we develop the product. We usually think about the design to make it as easy for the people who use the product to make sure that they can develop something effectively. Then there's the automation, so that you don't have to have people working on it, but rather the machines do it. Then, of course, the operation side, because you want to deploy somewhere and you need to make sure that it's stable and it stays running, even if there are problems with your environment. And in the end, since we are talking about data, you need to publish data in some way, whether that's, for example, delivering reports to people who need to have them or publishing into some sort of downstream system. When we work about increasing developer productivity, we apply a few principles. The first one, and I think the most important one, is the reuse, because the way you build solutions in Clover is basically by reusing the building blocks that we provide and building bigger pieces out of that and then reusing those. This is something that can very quickly get you where you need to, even in complex solutions. Oftentimes this leads to kind of templated solutions and frameworks that can be applied to many different problems from kind of similar area. So you can very easily build multiple warehouses or maintain many tables that have similar layout in a database with a single job if you do it properly. When we talk about the solution complexity, that's actually another interesting thing, because on one hand, you always want a tool that's easy to use so that people can start using it quickly, but that's powerful and flexible enough to implement pretty much everything you need. In most projects, you'll see something like 80-20 rule or 90 and 10 rule and whatever you call it, where most of the work is quite simple, but then to finish it, you will need to reach a little bit deeper and implement something complicated. In our case, this is a combination of providing rich user interfaces to build everything you need visually, using drag and drop and so on. But then if you need to, you can very quickly drop into code and implement any complicated business logic that you need to. And finally, the automation, that's a key for any business process these days. And the goal is to automate everything you have, from the jobs themselves, big data, automatically transform it, deliver where it needs to go, to monitoring, even to updates or deploying new versions of your code. You can automate that with additional tools as well. And in our case, we try to make this as simple as possible by providing built-in automation and also APIs and other approaches if you want to drive the automation from outside, for example, by using external schedulers or continuous integration or continuous deployment tools and so on. So in the end, what we typically have is that our customers tend to build framework-based solutions because they build something simple and apply it in multiple situations that are similar to that. When we help our customers, this has been mentioned a couple times before, we try to work with them as much as possible, and we just do it from the other side. So if they do not try to work with us, we try that and basically help them deliver the solution as quickly as possible. So we provide trainings, we help them design the architecture of their solution, even kickstart their processes and so on. And we typically focus on IT professionals, so data engineers or developers who need to support non-IT roles or their business and so, or less technical users. And of course, when you go this way, you usually start with, let's say, the development team and kind of propagate outwards. So we often work with subsets of the organizations and then try to build close ties with them so that we understand the problem that they have and help them deliver the solution as quickly as possible.